Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Alyssa Urish, and I'm a graduate student in the MAIS program, and I will be graduating this fall. Fingers crossed. My research is on school desegregation in Tacoma and its present-day connections to youth of color. You may be surprised to learn that Tacoma played a role in the national story of desegregation, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But in this presentation, I share an overview of my thesis, which complicates the commonly held acceptance that desegregation is the way towards an equitable education. So typically I spend more time on my positionality. I think it's really important. I get a lot of looks, well deserved as a white woman studying desegregation. So what I'll share for tonight, I'll share this picture because a big part of my identity development has been coming to see what's behind the proverbial curtain. I've been working as a teacher coach, and a program director in schools for the past 9 years. I see education as an act of liberation and a way of undoing our oppression. Looking back, a big part of what drew me to this awareness was being raised Jewish in a very non-Jewish community. And there's a lot there, but it was this internal identification with feelings of otherness that I think drew me, helped me empathize with and be curious about those more obviously marginalized by society. The past 5 years I've been working as a community partner at McCarver Elementary, just up the hill. And it was in this role where I learned that McCarver was actually the first magnet school in the nation and served as a model for districts across the country. In my thesis, I tell the story of desegregation, starting in the 1960s when the district made some formal moves to start to desegregate through the 1990s. Just consider this a plug to read my thesis because I'm not going to go into that in the 5 minutes I have tonight. But understanding the story of desegregation really led me towards my research questions, which is to apply a critical race theory lens and specifically look at how did racism play out and how Tacoma desegregated its schools. And then I was very interested in the connections to the experiences of youth of color, youth I'd been working with for the past 5 years. I use critical race theory and youth participatory action research as frameworks for guiding both how I ask my questions as well as my study. Critical race theory just hands down acknowledges that racism exists in our country, and it challenges this progressive acceptance and really argues that that policies like desegregation benefit white people first and foremost. Youth Participatory Action Research, or YPAR, positions young people to study their reality, to gain a critical consciousness and then make change towards that. And both of them are really related. Both have a shared commitment to social justice, and both frameworks challenge traditional views about what sort of knowledge is valid and reliable. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about the YPAR part of my research. So I had the privilege this summer of conducting a small YPAR project with 5 youth who came through the after-school program that I led at McCarver. These students are now 7th graders at one Tacoma middle school. So we engaged in a variety of things, from youth interviews to group meetings where we did some shared learning around the history of desegregation, and also youth were co-analyzers in themes that came up from their interviews. And through my integrated analysis of all the data, I came up with a number of themes about youth's experience, but in my thesis I focus on 5. And tonight I'll talk about 1, equality. So it was interesting, all 5 youth mentioned equality, either explicitly or implicitly. And the way they talked about equality really ranged from a colorblind notion of just a student saying like everybody is treated the same, everybody's treated equally at our school, to more advanced wrestling with concepts with the nuance between an equitable and an equal approach. So I'm thinking about Mariah, who talked about her desire to see more Black teachers and more teachers of color at her school. But she also said, when talking about how this would look, she said there'd be more teachers of color, but at the same time it would all be equal. So she was really uncomfortable with the fact that more representation at a school where there was a majority of students of color, more representation actually would mean more teachers of color and less white teachers. And I think she was also uncomfortable saying that to me, a white adult working with her, working in the schools. So I'm in the process right now of drawing connections between these 2 questions I asked, the history to present day. But it really boils down for me to the need to raise critical consciousness in our youth. The students who were in this one class at their school, that's an elective where they talk explicitly about race and racism, had a much stronger systemic understanding, were able to have just a more complex understanding of their reality, and I think better positioned to change the inequities that they will to challenge the inequities they will surely face as they grow up. Derek Bell said, critical race scholar, so much has changed, yet at the same time, the reality is still the same. So my hope is, and what keeps me going, is being led by our young people. Thank you.
We have a couple of minutes we can do a couple of questions right now, and then we'll have time at the end for some more. Questions or comments for Alyssa?
Can you explain deeper what you mean by critical consciousness?
Yes, and would you mind repeating the question so that we can figure it out?
Sure. The question was explaining more about what I mean by critical consciousness. So critical consciousness, I use that, I think of Paulo Freire's work, Brazilian philosopher and educator, who talks about critical consciousness as like a deeper understanding of one's reality. So having like I think of it zoomed out, like a understanding more of the systemic issues contributing to your experience. So taking it, like some students were really talking about like, oh, well, racism is just, you saw that one theme, one racist teacher, question mark? Because that was my question to them, is like, is the problem this one teacher, or is it a broader problem? So I think critical consciousness, really speaks to that more broad awareness. There's a lot more to say there, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
But before I ask my question, could you clarify the age range of the students you talked to? You said they're in 7th grade now, but when you asked these questions, was that the case?
Yes. So I knew them when they were, for some of them, as young as 3rd grade. But they all are 7th grade, so I think they all are 12 years old. And we did this research this summer, and so they were all, rising 7th graders this summer. The reason it was possible to do, such a relatively short YPAR study is because of the relationships I have with students to be able to ask such personal questions and talk about their experiences around race in particular. I think that I just wanted to it sounds weird to say take advantage, but like that was a big factor in me deciding and feeling able to do this sort of study in that time frame.
And they were all students of color?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that you would see a difference in, answers if you were to talk to students that weren't of color?
Difference of answers. Oh, thank you. I'm forgetting that part. The question was, are all these students of color? Yes. And would I see a difference of answers if they weren't students of color? I think absolutely. My question was around what is the reality of students of color, and how does that connect to the history of Tacoma's desegregation? So it also begs, I'm also very interested in what is the reality of white students today, and how is that connected? But I think from my thesis chairs, just narrowing the scope has been an ongoing challenge in this study.
Maybe we better hold it there and move to the next presentation. There will be more time at the end for general discussion. Thank you, Alyssa.